YouTube. What's going on, Kyle with TheCardGuyz? I'm with Austin Russell. It's been a minute, and we've been trying this video for like 2 weeks. You ended up top 8ing a skirmish a couple weeks ago with a really cool dash deck, and I've been telling you for the last 2 weeks we need to get you on, on camera and get to show this deck out to the world because it's really neat. And we got you twice actually in that skirmish.
Yeah, on camera.
Taking 1 damage in both matches. So it's pretty neat. Tell us why Dash and what your inspiration was for kind of building it the way you did.
So I actually built this hyper aggressive deck, like Dash deck, for Classic Constructed, and of course, a lot of its matchups ended up pretty poo poo.
Yeah.
Because Starvo and Viserai can kind of race it in those formats. It's really good into Prism, but. The morning of the Play Live skirmish, I kind of sat down and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to play because I didn't want to play Old Him, and I wanted something a little more fast-paced that I could move into a more mid-rangey strategy if I needed to towards the end of the game.
Okay.
For like Guardian, like Bravo, and in Old Him, like that matchup's really hard to win. Unless you know what you're doing and you understand like the threat density of their deck. Mm-hmm. But I kind of cut down the aggressive deck that I had and then made it into a 40 card deck. And then I had the sideboard package for my items, which were Dissolution Sphere, Induction Chamber, and Teklo Pounder. I actually took Induction Chamber completely out of the list, moving it down from CC to Blitz. Because Induction Chamber itself, towards the later of the game, is just a really good threat. But being able... It basically gives you, like, an extra inventory slot for the deck, and then you're running on 39 cards, which makes, having that one less card, your draws are a little more well put together for the deck as a whole. But that also kind of leaves you stranded against decks that are really good at fatiguing you, like
Oldhim.
Like Oldhim.
Yeah.
Or decks that just block for 3. Like Kasai, she has the Fridge, and then all of her cards block for 3. So a Kasai doesn't even have to actually combo you to kill you. She can just block you out of the game and fatigue you, ironically. I have not found out how to beat Kasai efficiently with this deck. I don't know if it's possible just because of... I'm sure it is because people have been doing very well with Dash lists, but... With this specific list, it's a lot harder because they can just go to a turn where they take a bunch of damage, block with their hand, and then if they're set up on, say, like 5 or 6 copper, and they hold a blood on her hands, they just present a 12 damage turn to you. And then if you block it, it gets worse. And if you're on 11 life, it puts you into a losing board. But...
Do you remember your matchups?
For Play Live, my round 1 opponent was Tyler Steenmeyer, I think is how you... pronounce his name.
The old guy,
and he was on Old Him. And he actually... I started with Induction Chamber into that matchup, and then I did Goliath Gauntlet, Teklo Foundry Heart, Skullcap, and then the Good Boots, which are the Iron Rot legs. So I run the Iron Rot against decks that have good dominate, like Old Him and Bravo. You'd be surprised at how much the 2 life makes a difference. When you're able to like pitch a card to keep a card from losing it later on in the game, it actually gives you 1 more card to boost with or to attack with later. It's generally really good to pitch like your yellows and your blues to them, and then it saves you the card later on. In that matchup, it didn't really like matter because he actually didn't get to a point where he got to cycle. He started with Ramparts, which makes like this matchup into them so much easier than the Stalagmite. And him and I were actually talking about it afterwards, and he was like, Stalagmite was the absolute way to go with it.
Yeah.
And it's true, because it does just turn off a lot of turns in this deck because it's so hungry for resources sometimes. If you don't have a good hand, like Payload and Magnetic Shockwave, your Red Throttles and your zoom-ins are kind of your breakpoint cards.
Yep.
And if they hit you with a stalagmite block at the correct time during your turn, it just kind of makes...
It shuts you off,
essentially. It kind of makes playing these as your finishers for the turn that much more difficult. And you don't run D-reacts, so you're really trying to pressure their hand or set up if you're super ahead. But then, say, like, they have Endless Winter and Oakenold.
Yeah.
So if you leave them with a turn where you're not prying enough out of their hand or you're presenting enough, they can just crack back with Oakenold or Endless Winter, and Endless Winter just shuts your whole deck down.
Yeah.
So Stalagmite really just secures that for them.
Mm-hmm. And
unfortunately, because he didn't have it, there were a lot of points in the game where like he just wasn't able to secure tempo because of it. And I ended up getting Teclo Pounder, and that just kind of started going over from there, because like it's kind of hard to block anything even when you have good equipment like that.
Sure. Then you beat Sebastian's ass round 2.
Yeah, and then I played Sebastian while he was on Kano. He got paired up into me. And he dealt 1 damage to me through the whole game. And Dash's...
That was Sebastian, by the way.
Dash is absolutely insane into Kano in this format.
Yeah.
Just in general, because you get to start with 3 equipment and have AB4, and you get to keep Teclo Foundry Heart into Kano. And so this basically blocks everything that they have to play against you, and then Teclo Foundry Heart still gives you the extra resources for your turn to just extend, and they just have to have it in their hand to kill you on those turns, like once you're so far ahead. Because this deck can just start with Teclo Pounder and then present 14 damage to them on the first turn of the game, and then it doesn't stop. Like, this deck does run out of fuel eventually, but to be honest with you, it just presents so much damage even without Teclo Pounder most of the time that, especially in the Kano, their life totals are so flimsy that, you know, if they just don't have it within the first 2 turns, they just resort to blocking and then they lose.
Yep.
So you're saying I'm probably blocked out.
And then I think my round 3 I played against this is the only one I don't remember, to be honest with you.
That's why we need timekeeper.
It's not too important. You won it though, let's be honest.
Bravo. I played against Andrew, and he was on Oldham.
Yeah.
And Andrew is my buddy, and I play chess with him all the time, and he is like the old him blitz player.
Yeah, he's
super good. He's played this matchup a lot.
People have seen him on the channel too.
Yeah, so he knows exactly what to do, and he ended up fatiguing me. I think he had 4 cards left in his deck, and it wasn't close. And then so I took the L on that one, and then I went into round 4, and I played. I think I played. I actually don't remember. This is no. That's the one that
was it Prism.
That was the lost one. I didn't play Prism.
You didn't play the Prism.
But it was a win. That's what's important.
You won.
Yeah, and then round 5. Round 5, I played against Viserai, and this is my first time really playing this deck, so I did not understand how strong Dissolution Sphere actually is into that matchup. That if you can understand how this deck works and like manipulating the combat chain, playing good value pieces, and just tempoing them out of the game, Dissolution Sphere turns off Revel in Moonblood for 3 turns. It turns off like
any room chance.
Yeah, it's like Swarming Glue Veil becomes a dead card. Like, you don't want to play it. They can't really play attacks along with their non-attack actions to generate value, or they lower the threat density in their deck to a point where they can't kill you anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't care. You run over them. But for that game, I did not start with Dissolution Sphere. And, that kind of allows them to have better turns into you and then just OTK you effectively. But Dissolution Sphere is definitely the way to start into that matchup, especially if you win the die roll and going second. There are a lot of times, like, we run Spark of Genius. So this card can just fix matchups for you.
Yeah.
Like it's
We saw you do it against Will today.
absolutely yeah. So I played Will today, and I actually went first, and I started with Dissolution Sphere because I wanted to see, like, even if I didn't have it for one more turn, how good it was, and it was still just unfair.
Yeah.
Like halfway through the game, I got him to 4 life, and then I actually blocked with my Spark of Genius because I had the Teklo Pounder in my hand. And I think my turn was like red zipper hit, boosted into playing Teklo Pounder. And so I presented lethal while I had no armor on the board, so he still had to block a card in order to have a good turn. And then once I put Teklo Pounder on the table, like, it was just from there. But, you know, like, I had an armory event against Will last week, and one of our other local players, Ben, where I started with this going second because they won the die roll and pushed me to it. And you get to choose your item when you choose your equipment after choosing who goes first.
Yep.
So I started with Dissolution Sphere, and it makes the game literally unfair for them.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because Viscera is such a strong deck. But if you pilot it correctly and you like figure out where to play your threats and win, you can really just steal that game from them.
For sure.
Because we have such good blocks in this deck. You just start with the same package that you start with Bravo. You go Teklo, Arcanite, because I know Viscera is kind of a boogeyman right now. You start with Ironrock Gauntlets and Accelerator, and you just crack the boots at the right time, like when they're on lethal and they can't really fight back. Like having 2 blue cards into like a Throttle, into a Magnetic Shockwave, cracking your Accelerator, and then, you know, loading up your Induction Chamber, and then using the last resource that you have to activate Teklo Foundry Heart, and put a counter on your pistol, swing pistol, use Induction Chamber to give it go again. Use your last floating resource from the Teklo Foundry Heart to swing pistol again, and you presented a 14 damage turn off of one hand.
Yeah.
You know, and at that point in the game, they're probably at 4 to 6 life, so they're just giving you their hand.
They're just giving everything.
And everything in that deck is like those hands. It's not like in Constructed where they have 3 copies of everything and they can block with something in the beginning and not lose threat density. Eventually they do, and then they start getting like 2 block cards. That's the biggest thing, is that their entire deck does not block for 3. And you get to eat the deck alive at that point. Like, it's just really good. And then, but at that event, I lost that round simply because I did not have the experience with the deck yet to understand what I needed to do.
But then you beat Ira in top 8.
Yeah, and then we went to top 8 because I got the top 8 on a 3-2.
You destroyed him.
And the Ira did not know what Dash did, but I hope learned very quickly. And that matchup is, I wouldn't necessarily say easy, but Teklo Pounder makes it way more in our favor.
Yeah.
And now that Payload is in the format and like T-Bone and stuff like that, if you get a good setup in your hand, you can just take away their entire equipment suite in a turn, and that deck loses so much for its armor being gone, because now that it has to block from hand, it kind of has to resort to this game plan where it just needs to kill you, or it's going to lose the game within 3 or 4 turns. And that's kind of exactly, I think that match only lasted 4 or 5 turns.
Yeah, something like that.
But I was just presenting so much damage that he literally looked at his hand and was just like, I can't block it or I won't be able to fight back.
Yeah. What was your top 4 match?
My top 4 match was against Alexon on Bravo.
That was the Bravo.
And I played Goliath Gauntlet against him, and I should have played the extra gloves, because we got down to 2-2 against each other, and he played an attack that was just 2 off over me. And he didn't have... he ended up pummeling it, and it was just the correct amount of damage. And then we played again in an armory event right after that, and I tested out Ironhide Gauntlets into it, and I ended up winning against him because, like I said, that the 2 life really does make a difference. Being able to add that to their important dominate attacks, especially later on. Like a lot of times with Bravo, unlike Oldhim, is that it doesn't have Crown of Seeds. It doesn't have Rampart or Stalagmite. It's going to be playing Anothos into you.
Yeah.
So, like, Anothos is a weapon that, unlike Winter's Wail, it doesn't just get a relevant on-hit trigger for pitching one card to it. In order for it to become a threat for our deck, generally it needs to be 2 cards.
Yeah.
Swing for 6.
Yeah. They just go Teklo or Tectonic Plating and just attack for 6.
Yeah. And then this deck has 0 defense reactions, but just because of the equipment suite and because everything blocks for 3, it makes it not so hard to just get through Bravo. And a lot of that also comes from like experience of playing the matchup, because eventually it gets to a point where you just sit down you start with Induction Chamber, and then you really want to covet your blues and block with like yellows, because you're going to be playing more of a Control Ninja set up into that match. So you're going to be really aggro for the first half of the game, and they're going to have to block or you're going to outdamage them, because all of their cards require a card or 2 to play, even with Tectonic Plating. So you have a lot more, you have like better hand economy than they do, and your cards are generally like better stat-wise than theirs are for what you are paying for them. And like a lot of people would probably look at that and be like, well, 11 dominate is kind of insane, but it gets a whole lot less scary if they don't have the ability to pay for Bravo.
Fair enough.
So like if they're behind, it's not going to be 11 dominate. And then even if it is, and you take a turn off and you end up taking 5 damage, like those turns, you have this equipment suite that you're going to start the game behind, and they're going to have to kind of play around whether or not they want you to have the 3 defense throughout the game of Skullcap, and then Teklo starts on 2. These cards are always live, so you can immediately block for 7 on a turn 1 Crippling Crush, which you shouldn't. You should just block what you can and then take your hand back.
Yeah.
And then lay in their hand as much as possible. And then eventually, when they have to start blocking with armor, you're generally winning the game from there. That's very good. Because you're able to block with cards from your hand, keep a blue, and then you're presenting 4 damage across 2 sources. And it becomes a lot harder for Guardian to deal with that at that point. I should also say that Dissolution Sphere, if you get a chance to play it against Oldhim, is also super relevant.
Just because of the Winter's Well?
Because it turns off Winter's Well, and like all your whole deck's 3 blocks. So now if their turn is just bad enough that they're like swing Frosty Whale, and then you block with 1 card from your hand, now you're keeping 3 cards in your hand, you might have a card in your arsenal, you get a full turn to go into them.
Yep.
And if they're playing like a more aggressive list, that's even better for you.
Yeah.
Like this deck is really good at capitalizing on your opponent's off turns. And it can block until they have them, which is really good. Like I said, the only problem is that if your opponent is super keen on playing like a control fatigue game mode, like you can't just start boosting into them and then hoping that you're going to get there. Like you want to play slow until you find Teklo Pounder, and then you want to slam down Teklo Pounder, and then you can kind of start pressuring them. But outside of that, they'll just fatigue you because you kind of, in order to give anything in the deck go again, you have to banish a card from the top of your deck. And that's the big problem with this, is that unlike CC, you can't just load more cards into your deck.
Yeah.
So eventually you're just going to mill yourself, and then you're kind of stuck with Induction Chamber and a blue, and you're hoping that's good enough. And sometimes it is. Like you'd be surprised at how many times I've won a game from pitch blue, load pistol, swing 2, Induction Chamber, swing 2. But so there's a lot of little tricks that you can do with this deck, and a lot of it is just through playtesting and controlling. Like I was talking about earlier, there are a lot of times where your hand setup might be something like this, and you're trying to figure out like what your threat density for this turn is, but you have Teklo Foundry Heart, so you're always kind of playing with one more resource than what you might think. And so let's say that you have like plasma pistol, and then you have induction chamber on the field with a counter on it. You know, so if your hand looks like this, the scenario I gave earlier is that you can pitch a blue, go throttle for 6, you have 1 floating, pitch your yellow, play magnetic shockwave for 4. So this is 10 damage you've boosted. Then you can crack Achilles accelerator after they've blocked. And if your opponent's about like 5 life, they're probably blocking about 3 cards from this or an equipment. You can crack Achilles accelerator and then use Teklo Foundry Heart with your action point, and this has go again, to flip 2, use 1 to put a counter on Teklo, swing it,
and then attack again with it.
Activate it, attack again. You're pushing 4 more damage over, 2 different sources, which the amount of sources that you're presenting the damage through is kind of what's important with this deck. And the reason why we play so many of these weird cards that you might not think about, like Throttle's obviously super good, and Magnetic Shockwave, a lot of people see it as like the combo piece with T-Bone. But what makes it so good is that like all these cards are breakpoints. And that's why I chose Yellow Zoom In, because it's the only other yellow card in the Mechanologist class that swings for 4.
Yeah.
Outside of Combustible Carrier even swings for 3, and it's just not worth running it for the hit trigger to make like anybody block it for 3, because they're just going to block the damage anyways. But like Zoom In gives you a cool opt thing. Kind of lets you keep extra threats into your deck instead of boosting them away. And then, of course, it swings for 4, which is the most important part about it. Payload, obviously. This card jams real good. So it's 2 for 6. And if you boost it with a card on the combat chain, it gains Dominate. So the Dominate's really good for closing games, but sometimes you just don't even need it. The just 2 for 6 is a spectacular stat line for Blitz, because you're presenting 1 over a 4th of their life total immediately. And if you have 2 yellow cards or 2 blue cards, or like 1 blue, a red, and then throttle and payload, you can go throttle for 6 into payload dominate. And that's real good. But even then, like you can have 1 blue, you can have a blue and a red in your hand, and then have payload in your arsenal, and then say building a more realistic hand here. So like again, the Spark of Genius, the T-Bone, Zipper, Throttle, and payloads in your arsenal. One of your lines can be pitch, your T-Bone in the beginning.
Zipper hit.
Go zipper hit. Boosting it. Swing with throttle off the 2.
Yep.
And then you can pitch the Spark of Genius to actually, I'm sorry, hold on. I did this wrong. So you can do the zipper hit first, and then you can actually load pistol and induction chamber, or not pistol and induction chamber, but if you already have them loaded, like you set up on your last turn, this is super duper good. You're gonna hear me say that a lot. Super duper good.
Yeah.
I should try not to cuss too much on the channel, so super duper good is my way of getting around it. So you're swinging for 5 here, and then you close the combat chain, or you don't even have to, but you can just swing with pistol, give it go again, and then use the 2 from your blue to now swing with throttle. So now this is 13 damage across the combat chain, and then you can pitch for 2 at the end to just payload.
Present their whole life.
Yeah, and then this one comes in with Dominate. So say that they're on 10, and even if they block with like on average like a 10 defense hand, if they don't have good equipment, you're just killing them. I'm sorry this is so messy. I'm just trying to show y'all some like play lines you can actually think about with a relatively realistic hands that like you would draw.
Well, I know Case is about to close here.
Yeah.
So we'll cut it short, but super informative.
I hope that it helps. We also play one maximum velocity because this card fucks.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's not a lot of times that you're going to get to play it in the deck.
Sometimes it happens.
But my God, when it happens, it does.
Yeah.
So, but guys, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm happy that there are actually people that wanted to see it.
For sure. There's going to be a list in the description below. So if you guys want to try it out on TTS with a few buddies, or if you want to build it for a local, let us know how it goes. We would love to know.
And if you figure out how to beat Kansai, please tell me.
Yes.
Please.
Awesome. Appreciate the video, man.